Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a lovely sunny day here in suburban Chicago. I am out for a walk after having finished my class for the day, and before I get back to grading, so much grading, and I thought I would chat with you a little bit. Taking a slightly different route so I can stop by the mailbox, which, I don't have a convenient mailbox near my house. It's really kind of out of the way. My old house, there were several that were not too far out of the way, but this house I have to kind of go out of my way a little bit to find a mailbox. But that's okay. Just gives me a different route to walk. Well, I hope that you are having a lovely week. I had a great time with the March Mayhem tournament, and I thought I would share my thoughts about that with you. So in case you weren't able to listen to it, the March Mayhem tournament was a bracket-style elimination competition that my design partner, broadcasting partner Rob and I hosted on our Game Fight Show podcast, which is part of the Rattlebox Games podcast network. It's just, that sounds ostentatious, but Rob and I did over the course of 6 weeks, we did 19 episodes, which feels pretty good. The first round of the tournament, which was 8 matches, Rob and I hosted, just the two of us, talking about the different matches. And then we had 10 episodes in which we had guests on. And then we had the big live stream finale in which we also had guests on. So it was quite an amusing time. If you didn't get a chance to listen to it, all the podcast episodes are still there. You could listen your way through and find out what happened in the various episodes. I will say, however, my plan for this episode is just to reflect a little on the experience of making that this season of the bracket, and so in that regard, I am going to be talking about what happened in the tournament. So if you haven't listened yet and you think you want to, you always could go listen later, but some of the surprise of what's going to win will be spoiled by this episode of Pick Up and Deliver. So I thought I would talk about that. First off, the guests. What a delightful and fun group of guests we had on the March Mayhem bracket this year. When Rob and I were thinking about who to ask, I will reflect on the fact that we decided to punch up a little bit to sort of make some requests of people who we had no business asking, because we didn't nearly have the listenership to deserve the kind of guests that we got. What can I say? The board game community is super nice and super generous. We had several guests on, people who I just considered it was a real treat to get to talk to them and to have them on the podcast and to enjoy their thinking, their participation in the pod. So I just wanted to run through the guests that we had. Apologies in advance if I forget anybody. I hope that I won't, but it's quite possible that I'll forget somebody. To start off, we had Jason Brooks from Brooks Fun Games. Jason is a friend as well as another designer and creator. He created the board game Legacies, which is currently, I think, on a boat, making its way to the United States. It had a pretty successful Kickstarter, and I'm excited to see what happens with that. Then we had, who do we have there? Well, we had Andrew Nerger from Road to Infamy Games, or R2I Games. Andrew Nerger is probably best known as one of the co-designer of Crypt, and more recently Canvas, which has been the R2I Games has really carved out a niche for themselves, making very accessible, welcoming games that play in like 15 to 20 minutes. It works really well, that part of their mission, and I admire them for it. It was really fun to chat with Andrew again. Andrew is, I must confess, another friend, a friend in real life as opposed to a friend that we've met through board gaming, although we did meet him through board gaming. Yeah. Next up, we had Paul Booth, the game scholar and very good friend of mine from DePaul University, who came on to talk about, I may be getting the order wrong. I'm apologizing in advance about that. But he came on to talk about Wingspan, Just One, Scythe, and Spirit Island. And it was quite a delight to hear his thoughts on those games. Yeah, that was great. Next up we had, and this was very exciting personally to me, somebody I haven't talked to personally, but somebody I've listened to a long time. We had Ambi Valdez, one of the co-hosts of Board Game Blitz, came on the show to help us with talking about Camel Up and Lords of Waterdeep and Pandemic and Gloomhaven. That was a real treat to talk to her. Ambi is super smart. One of the lessons from that particular episode is thinking about getting people ready. Rob and I felt like we were maybe a little too bombastic, or maybe we worried we were a little too bombastic in just how we talked, because Ambi tended to be a little quieter, but it seemed like she was having a good time. And Ambi was the first guest to do her own game fight show on top of our saying game fight show, which was really fun. So it was a real treat to have Ambi on as a guest. That was the end of the second round, and then we had the third round, which things started to get really heated up. Now I'm losing track of who was on when. We had Jonathan Edwards from the Forgot My Dice podcast. Jonathan has been making really interesting content for years now, and Rob and I know him from way back in the board gaming sphere. We had Christina Rouse from Blue Peg Pink Peg, another sort of luminary in the field, who was generous enough to give an hour of her time so that we could talk with her about nonsense, particularly Race for the Galaxy and Azul. She fought real hard for Azul as the tile-laying fan, but I'm afraid Race for the Galaxy is the one that won the day there. We had Nick Mariner, the Good Mariner, somebody I know from a variety of places, but who appeared on a number of different podcasts, including Ludology, and it's now called 5 Days for Doomsday, Ben Maddox's previous podcast incarnation. Nick is a super smart and funny guy, and it was fun to have him on again. An alumni from the first season as well. Who else? Then we had Ben Moy, your friend Ben Moy, who is a really prominent person in the game design conversation space. He helps a lot with people talking about making their designs better and thinking about how to work designs in ways that will make them easier and better. So Ben Moy, it was a delight to talk to him. He and I, we know each other sort of in passing, but I haven't spent a lot of time chatting with him, so it was fun to get to talk to him. So I feel like I feel like I'm missing one person here, because I have two left to talk about. The people who came on for the quarterfinals, or for the semifinals. We had, again, another rock star guest, Keith Mateka. Keith Mateka is the founder of Thunderworks Games and the designer of Role Player. Really nice and generous guy that we know both personally and through board gaming, and it was really exciting to have him on. And then we also got to talk to Lauren Nepomuceno, who is part of the XYZ Game Labs crew, and she came on and talked with us about Wingspan and Lords of Waterdeep. So that was really fun as the final guest. But it was really great to get to talk to all these people, and it made me reflect on what a generous community the board game hobby is, the board game design space, and just to think about the joy that I've had in producing some of these, producing this content and getting to know some of these people. So those are the guests. Like I said, lots of really interesting guests. I want to talk about the tournament a little bit, though. We had some weird results in the tournament, and I will say in part it reflects on the fact that we just don't have a huge audience yet, so we have weird votership. But I love it. As a result, we get unexpected results that make for interesting podcasting. Rob and I are pretty seriously considering keeping the Game Fight Show going as a regular concern, more like a once a month podcast, or have a month off and then do 2 episodes or something, as a way of keeping the listenership up. If we only do a thing once a year, it's really hard to get regular listeners. Whereas if we were to do regular episodes once a month or every other week, I think that we would have a higher level of sustained listenership, just because over time the audience would build. So we're thinking about doing sort of regular alternative brackets throughout the year, engaged with different kinds of smaller level competition, not just games, but also maybe game designers, maybe conventions, maybe mechanisms, who knows? Lots to work with there. But so let's talk about the results a little bit. First off, I'm going to talk about the surprises. I'm going to pick from the initial batch. I had several surprises. I was really surprised to see just one beat out Through the Ages. I think Through the Ages is an incredible game. As you all know, it's in my top 50, and it's a game I play a lot. I don't know how somebody says just one is a better game, but the voters did. Camel Cup beat Terraforming Mars. I guess I can see that one because I think Camel Cup is authentically really interesting as a game. There's a lot going on there. But again, I lean toward the heavier choices, so Terraforming Mars would have been my winner there. I have to say I was surprised at how far Pandemic got. Pandemic got all the way to the semifinals, or the quarterfinals, before Lords of Waterdeep beat it. I was surprised to see, Race for the Galaxy also is one of those games that I was really surprised to see do as well as it did. And then Ticket to Ride also. Ticket to Ride beat out Gaia Project, which, Gaia Project tends to have a good reputation. Again, who knows where our voters are coming from. As we pick up in audience, perhaps we will get a more predictable batch of voters. But in that regard, it's almost more fun to have something unpredictable. I will say our experiment of the 3 different factions created for a much more interesting bracket than last year. What we've done in last year and what we did in 2017, the bracket was based around the Board Game Geek top 32 games or whatever, and it was a little more than 32 because we wouldn't, no duplicates are in there, so Brass Lancashire and Brass Birmingham, only one of those gets to be in, and only one of the Through the Ages gets to be in, and there's a couple other Ticket to Ride, etc. But then we also came up with 2 other, I gotta credit Rob for this, Rob came up with 2 other parts to the bracket that allowed us to bring in other games. There's the Elite 8. The Elite 8, so what we did is we took the top 16, and most of the games, half the bracket came from the very top of the Board Game Geek ratings, mostly from those top 16. But then we also had what we called the Elite 8. These are games that had, in the past few years, come out and won a significant number of awards. This allowed us to bring in games that aren't so critically received by the Board Game Geek elite, but still are widely popular. It also gave us an opportunity to give Wingspan a berth again, because one of our rules for the bracket is that if you lost in the first round, if you lose in the first round, you cannot be in the tournament the next year in the same bracket. So last year, Wingspan, in a surprise upset, lost its first bout, and so Wingspan could not be in through the top 16. However, it was able to get in through the Elite 8 and ended up doing very well once it was in the tournament. By contrast, but then, so we have the top 16 games, we have the Elite 8, and then we have the Old Ocho, the 8 games that are classics that still are able to hold their own against the more modern games. And this stuff like Race for the Galaxy, Ticket to Ride, I think Castles of Burgundy was in there from the Old Ocho, Lords of Waterdeep was, and Pandemic. And so we had 2 games from the Old Ocho who made it all the way to the finals all the way to the semifinals, and one game that made it to the final bout from the old Ocho. And, for me, that's really interesting because it suggests that, the board game media sphere is a little bit up its own business about new stuff. Because that's the inevitable cycle of news. How many times can you talk about how great Race for the Galaxy is? But as a result, then we tend to overestimate how much people like the new thing. And, people have been playing games for a long time. Those old games are popular because they're great. And so seeing a game that's got a little bit of dust on it or a little bit of age around the eyes still coming in and really making a showing was quite a delight. I don't know if I have any other big surprises. I was not happy to see Gloomhaven lose to Pandemic, but that's just personal preference. Also, Brass losing to The Crew felt not great to me. I think The Crew is a fine game, but not better than Brass, not by any reasonable estimation. But in terms of the people voting on our Twitter, it was. So congratulations to the people who voted there. Well, I guess that's enough babbling about the tournament. Hopefully you got a chance to listen. If you didn't, like I said, it's in our podcast feed over on Game Fight Show, or you can search up Game Fight Show podcast to find the episodes and listen. I do recommend it. It is a fun time and quite enjoyable. So thanks for listening to me ramble, my post-mortem about the 2020 March Mayhem bracket, and head over there and subscribe to that if you haven't. Thanks for joining me. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.